Perhaps you noticed the music on that video, a lot of it was coming from this particular instrument. I was playing on the first part, but my teacher was playing on the last part there. This is called a molo in our language. It's a 3-string guitar or banjo, and it's been used in West Africa for hundreds of years. And I am learning to play it. It's a very quiet instrument, so you won't hear it very well unless it's been amplified. But I'll just try to do a little bit. So that's a molo. As you saw in the video, we've been in Niger for 36 years. The Lord has seen fit to take us through many different ministries. In fact, we like to joke that we've done everything in missions except operate on people and fly planes. We were involved in church planting for a number of years, teaching third culture kids, that is missionary kids and diplomats kids and others. I've taught at the Theological College for a number of years in the MA. Nancy's been involved in personnel and administration. I've had a music ministry, partly with this, partly with my other instruments, the piano and guitar that I play. We've been involved in youth translation and children's ministries as well. Before we go on to the next part, I'm going to have Nancy come and share just a little story from our last term. I think we're going to do it on the mic here. And if she could just tell you a little tiny story from our last term, she will give you a little idea of some of the things that we've been involved in.
It's good to be here this morning. Sometimes it seems like we don't see what God is doing, but years later when we look back, we can see how He worked. Our mission has a leprosarium. It's become more of a medical center now, but it used to just treat patients who had the disease of leprosy or Hansen's disease. And there was a man who came there for treatment. This man was quite an important man in his community, and he had 4 wives. He was a Muslim. He had 4 wives and 30-some children. And while this man was being treated for Hansen's disease at our medical center, he heard the gospel and he gave his heart to the Lord. He went home and told his children and his wives about the Lord Jesus, and many of them became believers. Well, one of those children, his name was, we'll call him Moses. Moses became a believer, and he eventually became a school teacher and was the government assigned where school teachers will teach, and they assigned him to live in a village north of Tara where we used to live. Before his marriage, he had a child with a woman who was not his wife, and that child's name was Alma. Well, when Moses and his wife Martha were married, they realized that because he was the father, he should be raising this child, Mama. And so they took him into their home to raise him. And by this time, John and I had gotten to know Moses and Martha because they lived near us. There were very few Christians in the area, and so the few Christians that there were found each other, and even though he did not live in Tara, he would come to Tara for Christmas celebrations and Easter, and so we got to know the family. And then we lost touch. They moved on. We knew that they had gone to Nigeria for missionary training. God had called Moses and Martha to be missionaries in Niger, but they went to Nigeria for some Bible training. So we lost touch with them. And then about 2 years ago, I was invited to a dinner that the mission that Moses and Martha were working for was putting on. And so I went to this dinner, and I met them again. I was so surprised to see them there because, like I said, we had lost touch. And there was a young man, a tall, handsome young man, taking pictures that evening. And they said, "This is our son, Hama." So we had not seen Hama. The last time we saw him, he was just a little guy. And now here he is, about 6 feet 5 inches tall, and taking pictures and a university student. So we got connected with him again, and he started coming over to the house to visit. And he said, "My friends and I, my Christian friends and I, we've realized the power of video and how much our generation is connected to their phones." Yes, even in Niger. So he said, "We're starting a ministry where we can make videos as an outreach to our peers." And so they registered this with the government. It's entirely driven by Hama and his friends. And it's just so exciting to see this little boy that we had once known, who is now taking an initiative to start his own ministry, and just to see him growing in his faith and sharing that with other people. So continue to pray for Hama and also for his parents who are missionaries now in Niger as well. Thank you.
As you saw from the video, we have decided that the Lord has been leading us that we should return to the U.S. and be based in the U.S. for the next few years until we officially retire, whatever that means. As you saw, there are family reasons for that. During this past term, Nancy's mom passed away, and her dad really was asking us if we couldn't come back, and that really tugs. And our children have been through some really difficult times over the past term as well. And you saw that there are health issues. If you look at my skin, and you saw a picture of something that happened to me, an allergic reaction to some medications I've had in Niger. If you look at my skin right now, I'm under treatment for sun damage to my skin. All those 36 years in Niger have really done a number on my skin from the sun, and it's not going away, and because of the allergic reactions I've had to medications, we haven't been able to find a good treatment. So I'm under treatment right now, but it's not terribly painful, but it is uncomfortable. And then we have had reduced ministry opportunities. We weren't able to visit Tara the entire term, this past term, because of insecurity and because of the continued threats of danger. During this past term, one of our friends was kidnapped. And they actually, the U.S. government, you may not be aware of this, but the U.S. government actually sent in Navy SEALs to rescue him, and did rescue him 6 days after his kidnapping. So the U.S. government actually sent in people to rescue this friend of ours. And that's becoming more and more an issue in parts of West Africa. So right now we have what we call a home assignment, where we go around and we visit churches and speak about our ministry and work. But starting October 1st, we're going to be moving to Dayton, Ohio. We're going to be settling there and trying to find a house to buy in this market. And at 60-somethings, we're not the usual millennials looking for a house. This is our first time owning a house. This will be our first time, so we're in our 60s, and we're kind of scared about that. So you can be praying about that. We'll be taking on new jobs. The jobs that I will be doing will be as a consultant for theological education for French-speaking Africa. Did you know that there are more French-speaking Christians in Africa than there are in France? Yeah, way more. In fact, there are more French-speaking people in Africa than there are in France. There are 24 countries in Africa where the official language is French. That's out of 54. Not quite half, way less than half the population, but about 350 million people where the official language is French. And these countries in the world are very under-resourced. We think about Haiti, we think about other countries. Well, these countries in Africa are very under-resourced. And I'm not there to, bring all the solutions and everything up. We can't do that. God has the solutions. But I want to be in a position where I can negotiate and help people listen to their needs and try to help them find solutions to their needs and resource the theological institutions and informal training institutions that are in Africa. So that'll be my job. If you want to know more about it, I can give you more details. We can talk about it at the lunch afterward if you'd like. Nancy has been in personnel. She knows our personnel system. She will be involved with our personnel director at SIM USA headquarters in Charlotte, North Carolina. And she will be working with him, especially to resource our missionaries who are in Africa. And those are coming from all over the world, but especially our U.S. people that are in Africa. So just to sum up before I finish up here about our ministries, you saw on the video that I wrote a book. This is the result of my doctoral studies. It's not my doctoral thesis, it's different. It's a book that's written more to make it more accessible to people in the pew like you. And it's basically a summary of some of what I found, the research that I found, worship music and culture, the case of the Songhai of Niger. So thanks for the privilege of being your missionaries, and thanks for all those years of supporting us. We really appreciate that. And we ask you to continue to pray for us and support us over the next few years. Thank you. Good morning again.
Good morning.
How many of you in this congregation like to run? Anybody? Anybody here like to run?
From what?
Just run. Never from. To. We're going to something, aren't we? Someone has said that Christians are like tea bags. They're no good unless they've been through hot water. George Mueller, famous Christian, put it this way: the only way to know strong faith is to endure great trials. And I was just reading this morning a book by Jim Pluteman, who was the former director of our mission, SIM. This book is called Teaching Across Cultures. And he says something almost exactly the same. In this world, we Christians live with inherent tension. Tension between the way things are and the way they should be. Between what God wants us to do and what we want to do. Between God's truth and what's happening in our lives. When we live in harmony with the will of God, we are in a state of equilibrium. When we ignore the clear teaching of Scripture, we live in a state of painful disequilibrium. Well, I like running. You can go on to the next slide there. And I like to, even in hot weather, by the way, hot to us is a lot hotter than what you experience here, although you probably get more humidity than we do. So that may make it feel hotter at times, I'm sure. But this morning I want to talk a little bit about persevering. And one of the things you have to do when you're running is to persevere. Especially when it's hot. It takes energy, it takes a lot of oomph, whatever you want to call it, to get through a race. And of course, we've just seen the Olympics, and some of those runners were running in pretty hot conditions. Especially that marathon I heard was pretty tough run. Some of those people. And there's one passage in Scripture that I really think goes along well with the idea of running. And it's one of my favorite passages, probably one you know about. Go ahead and put click the next thing, it comes up. There you go. We're going to read a passage that I'm sure many of you know well. And I'm reading it from the ESV here. So it's Hebrews 12, 1 to 3. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. Well, the image that the writer of the Hebrews is presenting us is an image from the world of sports. And I'm sure he's thinking of the Olympic Games that were held back in Greece way back when. And some of the games that are held today can be kind of an image like this. So it's this image that comes from the world of sports. And you have the word running, a race, in that first verse. And the word for race is agona in the Greek, from which we get the word agony in English. And you think of the face of that runner coming in after a long race, and the relief and the exaltation of that person as I finish this race, and I'm done. It's a supreme effort that I've put out. It's a struggle, but it's a struggle in the cause that's important when we look at the Christian life. So, and of course it's not a sprint. It's not taking just a short time. The Christian life is much longer than just what we would consider a sprint. Now, there's another word that appears in this passage 3 times. Once in the noun form and twice in the verb form. And it appears once in each verse. I don't know if you noticed it when you went through, but when I was reading it, it's the word endurance in this particular version, but it's perseverance in some of the versions of the Bible. Endurance is something that is an act of persistence, a determination, standing firm, holding on. So Christians are called to persevere in the faith, persevere in their calling. I know many of us, you are all around the world, we've all been persevering through this pandemic, struggling to figure out what God's doing sometimes, perhaps. And the violence we've seen over the past year. It breaks our hearts. What is God doing? What is God showing us? We've been 36 years in Niger, and I share from some of my experiences, some of our experiences in Niger, what we've had to endure and persevere. This is not an easy thing. You can go on to the next slide. But when your wife nearly dies in childbirth with your first child in Africa, you persevere. You can go on to the next one. When 3 years later, she nearly dies of malaria, you persevere. Now, if you wonder if I picked the wrong photo, what in the world does the flat tire have to do with malaria? Ask us about the day that we had to evacuate Nancy from our village situation because of her malaria. She was almost gone. And we had a flat tire that delayed us long enough so that we would meet the rescue party that was coming up to meet us. We didn't have cell phones. We had no communication with the outside world. If it wasn't for the flat tire, we would have missed the rescue party. Turn to the next one. When your daughter contracts asthma and has it for all of her growing up years, and is allergic to things in Africa, we persevere. Now I need to put an aside in this story. Our daughter was healed instantly from her asthma one day when she was 17.
Praise God.
And I know God heals her. And He does it sometimes beyond our expectations. I'm going to the next slide. When your son, at the age of 14, contracts epilepsy, you persevere. He still has it today. It's under control with medication, but he still has it today. When you are suffering from allergies, this is one of the main reasons I'm coming home, and I have especially nasal allergies to dust in Africa that are very, very severe. You persevere. When 6 men who had made a profession of faith at one point in their lives all go back to Islam, you persevere. When over 80 churches are looted and burned by angry mobs, including some of them that are very dear to you, you persevere. When floods destroyed the Bible college where you teach, not once, but twice, we persevered. Yeah, it involved living through long power cuts, water cuts, many other things in Niamey. But here we are. We've lived in Niamey the last 13 years. Elizabeth Elliot said this: "Faith's most severe tests come not when we see nothing, but when we see a stunning array of evidence that seems to prove our faith vain. If God were God, if he were omnipotent, if he had cared, why would this have happened?" Elizabeth Elliot, as you know, was the widow of one of the 5 slain missionaries that were killed by the Guarani Indians in Ecuador in 1956. She later had the chance to go into that ethno-linguistic group and help translate the Bible for them and begin to witness to them of faith in God. Many Guarani today are Christians. But before she married Jim Elliot, she was involved in a ministry in Ecuador that completely failed. And she wrote a book about it called These Strange Ashes, from which I've taken that quote. If you're interested, I have a copy of it here. You can see it after the service. But the question you're probably asking right now, okay, so the Bible tells us to persevere, and we need to persevere, but how? I think that there are many ways the Bible tells us we can persevere. But in this passage, I think there are 3 clues, 3 ways to persevere that this passage gives us. And one of them relates to the past, one of them relates to the present, and one of them relates more to the future. But they all concern us right now, where we are in this place in Baldwin, New York. So let's look at the first one. Remember. When you look at the passage, at Hebrews 12:1, it says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses." Hebrews 12 follows Hebrews 11. I hope you figured that out by now. And Hebrews 11 is all about those zeros that God turned into heroes. And those people that have gone before us in the faith, that cloud of witnesses that's up there looking down on us right now, I think that's biblical to say that. Yes, they're praising the Lord, but they're also seeing where we are right now. Because it says they're witnesses, the clouds of witnesses. And I know many of you, some of you may realize that the word for witness in the original language is the word from which we get the word martyr in English. Originally, the word martyr meant someone who testifies of his faith for Jesus Christ. And eventually, many of those witnesses became people who would die because they testified for their faith. And so the word became associated with people who died because they were faithful to God and testified of Him. And that's where we get the word martyr. But the word witness is that word in Greek. But it refers to all the saints in the Old Testament. The writer of the Hebrews is referring to all those saints. They were commended not because of what they did, but because of their faith. By faith, they went out. By faith, Abraham. By faith, Moses. By faith, Noah. They were commended for their faith, their faithfulness. Of course, we could add to that many others since the time that the writer of Hebrews lived. Of course, Jesus is the perfect example. We're going to come to that in a minute. But we could add the church fathers and then mothers, if you want to call them that. Origen, Tertullian, Augustine, Perpetua, who was a lady martyr for her faith in North Africa. All these names that I mentioned here are all from North Africa, by the way. They were all Africans. And not to say that all Christians, of course, were Africans, but many were. And then we could go up to the times of the Reformation. You could mention Martin Luther and John Calvin. and John Knox and the Wesleys, and we could go on with the names. But you know what? All those people, we look back and we see God, how God was faithful to them. We can remember that. What God has done for the saints in the past. There's a race that I like to run. Haven't done it for a while. On the next slide there. It's held every year on Thanksgiving Day in Manchester, Connecticut. Not too far from here. It's where my parents lived for 30 plus years. This race is held, and you can see that all the runners down the street there. See how many runners are in the street? It's about 4.5 miles. It's not real long. It goes through the streets of the city, downtown and around through the streets of the city. There's a long 1.5 mile hill on it. It is a killer. Because you think it goes in parts. You think you're at the top and you got to go a little more and then a little more. And there's a steep part right at the end before you hit the downhill. This race every year has about 20,000 runners in it. But what's really cool about the race is the number of spectators. There are around 50,000 lining the streets all the way along the race. And when I think of that cloud of witnesses that's looking down on us right now, I think of this race. When I'm running that race, there's always somebody I know in the crowd somewhere who's yelling out, "John, go! You can do it! I know you can get there! Keep it up! Faster! Go ahead!" And I can just see those people up in heaven. You can get through this. You are capable because God has made you capable, not because of yourself, but because God is with you. You can get through this race. You can get through this trial. You can get through this pandemic. Because God is leading you. Those clouds of witnesses have run the race, and they finish it. And they know what it's like. They were faithful witnesses. They're applauding us. They're an example and an encouragement to us. And my dad, who was a member of this church, is one of them. He was born right here in Baldwin. Some of you know that. So we can remember what God has done for them, but we can also look back and remember what God's done for us over our lives. And one of the things I think of when I think of my life is you. You've been part of our team, working with us to bring the gospel to people who are the least reached and the least reached in the world. And you have stood with us in prayer and my finances. And when I remember that, I can keep going. And you can also not only remember what God has done for the saints in the past, what God has done for you, you can also remember who you are. Thank you. And whose you are. What's your identity in Christ? And as we think of these things, one of the things we need to do always, in every situation, is give thanks. Thank God for what He's done. You know, it may sound like a cliche, it may sound like you've heard this before, but I noticed that at one point in my life in Niger, I was getting to the point where I was complaining about everything. And I was really upset. I was angry, and I was saying, why? And I realized I was becoming like the Israelites in the desert, who kept complaining about what they didn't have, and were moving farther and farther away from God and forgot to thank Him for what they already had. And we can become just like that. 1 Corinthians talks about that because the Israelites are an example to us. We can become those complainers who move farther and farther away from God, or we can choose to say, I thank you for this, even though I don't understand what you're doing. So that's number one. 3 ways to persevere, to remember. The second way is to think about something in the present. And when I look at this passage as a runner, and as I see the second part of verse 1, it says, "Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance." I think of training, and I think of discipline. If you're going to run a race, you don't just decide the morning of the race to get up and start running. You're going to hurt yourself. That's not a good idea. And please don't try it on anybody here. But discipline is required to compete in a race. In 1 Corinthians 9:24-27, Paul uses a similar analogy to talk about, I think you can go on to the next slide too now, to talk about this race that we're in. And he says this, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it." This is 1 Corinthians 9:24-27. "Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified." So running takes discipline. Think of a runner in the Olympics again. They've trained a lot of years, and they've taken a lot of time, taken sacrifice, taken concentration to be where they are, consecration, energy, and they've given up things that they otherwise might have had. Sometimes it's a choice not between good and bad, but between good and the best. Even when it involves things that are permissible. I can't tell what that is for you. For each of us, it's going to be different, depending on what calling God has given you. But sometimes we have to give those things up. So what is our discipline as Christians? This is going to be anything new to you. You've heard this before, but maybe it's a different context, and it'll help you put it in a different hole, a different peg in a different hole. It's maintaining our relationship with God, however you're going to be doing that. Reading and studying the Bible. Understanding the promises He's given us. Praying. Being with His people in fellowship. Developing the gifts, the passions, and the talents that He has given you and the calling that He's placed on your heart. But this passage talks about weights. Now, can you imagine someone in the Olympics wearing in a marathon, wearing a backpack and carrying 2 sacks of cement in each arm? Is that person going to win the race? Is that person even going to get through the race? I don't think so. When you're running a race, you want to strip off everything that's unessential. You want to just have the minimum. What are the weights and the distractions that we fight with today? I'm going to put a little thing in here. I am not opposed to cell phones. In fact, this was a lifeline for us during the pandemic. We could contact our kids directly from Africa when we couldn't come home for vacation. We could talk to them daily and see them using different apps on the phone. I am not saying technology is bad. However, we need to control it, and we need to not let it control us. And that's a hard balance. I find myself, even now back in the U.S., too much time on this thing. Or even on the computer, Facebook, or whatever you do. Those weights, we need to strip off. That can be one of the distractions. Materialism, technology, advertisements. Worries, even family sometimes can be in the place of God. Politics and government can get in the way. Anything that gets in the way of our pursuit of God needs to be stripped off. Let's keep the main thing the main thing. And you're saying, well, wait a minute, can't I have any fun? Is it all discipline? Of course it's not all discipline, all rigorous, all that. God never intended that we not enjoy the life He's given us. He wants us to have abundant life. But God never lets us mistake this place for home either. This is not our ultimate home. We are pilgrims, journeying through, running through, if you want, this life. Waiting for something that's better, just like Abraham was. And then there are the sins. The sin which clings so closely. I'm sure every one of us in this room has a sin that clings closely. And I could list some of the different sins that are possible. Jealousy, discouragement, pornography, greed, envy, fear, you name it. I'm sure everyone in this room has at least one that plagues you. We need to strip them off. We need to confess those sins when we do them. We need to receive God's pardon. And we need to continue to persevere in the race that God has given us. So the first step is remembering the past, remembering what God has done. The second thing is, in the present, we discipline ourselves. And the third thing has to do with the future. And this is really cool. Verse 2. Looking to Jesus, or fixing our eyes on Jesus, some versions say. The founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame and seated at the right hand of the throne of God. This passage says two things to me as a runner. First thing is, don't look back. If you are running a race, you don't want to look behind you. Why? Because you might trip and fall, for one thing. But secondly, it's going to slow you down. Even if there's a runner that's close behind you and you want to know where he is, you don't look back. I don't know if you noticed that people who are in a race, they don't usually look like unless it's a real long one, like a marathon, where you're not quite as, you don't quite have as much time to worry about. You don't look back. Now, what does that mean for me as a Christian? I think that we need to remember that all of our accomplishments, our family, our training, our gifts, our money, our diplomas are not what counts in God's eyes. The things that are past are not necessarily, God will use those things. God will allow them to be something that will help us in the future. What I'm going to be doing in the future is all a reflection of what God has allowed me to do in the past. But the fact that I have a PhD doesn't mean I'm more important than you are in God's eyes. Paul talks about that in Philippians chapter 3. Philippians 3. 12 to 14, I'm going to read here. After talking about all of his qualifications and all the things that he has, he says, you know what? I count all those things as garbage. Garbage. And then in verse 12, Philippians 3, there's some Romans here. Philippians 3, 12 to 14, he says this, not that I've already attained this or have already become perfect, but I press on to make it my own because Christ Jesus has made me his own. Brothers, I do not consider that I have made it my own, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. I press on. So the second thing, we don't look back as runners. We don't count the past as being important in the sight of God, although God will use it. It is important in our lives and it helps us to move forward. But it's not that I'm better than you because I have this and this and this. or that I'm a better Christian than you are because I do this and this and this, because I'm a missionary. The second thing is to look forward. What is our goal? When a runner is running, what's his goal? The finish line, the finish tape, right? He wants to cross that line and finish that goal. What's our goal? Maybe more important, who is our goal? Jesus Christ is our goal. That's the finish line we're looking for. Now when you're running a race, if it's a long race and you can't see the finish line, what do? What I do is I look at a landmark, like a big tree, or some big building up in front of me, or something up there that I can see it, and I run toward that. Once I get to that one, I look for another one. I think that's a bit like the Christian life. We know what the end goal is. We're going towards Jesus Christ. But sometimes we can't see the goal, and we look for one intermediate goal. Jesus is our goal and our example. He suffered, he faced opposition, but he received the reward for his suffering and his faithfulness. Jesus had an attitude of steadfast and active faith. Why? Verse 3 tells us. Verse 2 is for the joy that was set before him. Verse 2. For the joy that was set before him. He knew that that was the best that was up there. That he was going to be able to redeem all human beings from slavery to sin. And when we meditate on him, and I've done this very often during this pandemic and the last term when things just seem so awful. When we meditate on him, the discouragement doesn't become as great. It lessens. It's still there. I can't say it's completely gone. But that discouraging feeling, you know what? Jesus has gone through all that for me. I can persevere through this. Remember what God has done in the past. Train and discipline ourselves now in the present. And look forward to our goal. There's 3 ways to persevere. Let's pray together. Father, we thank you so much this morning for your faithfulness to us. We know that you have been faithful over the past years. We know that you are continuing to be so in this time right now. Pray that you would encourage us by your word, and encourage us, Lord, by the examples of others. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.